welcome everybody to this webinar about automating network monitoring with NetBox and Icinga. My name's Mark Coleman. I'm co-founder and chief evangelist at NetBox Labs, and I'm joined today by two fantastic panelists. Blairim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. Also from my side, I'm Blairim, COO at Icinga, located in Germany. And yeah, basically my responsibility is taking care of the daily operations and working with fantastic partners like Dave from Sol1.
Perfect. Thanks, Blairim. And Dave, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Blairim. G'day, I'm Dave. I'm from Sol1. We're a open source integrator in Australia. Been working with NetBox and Icinga for many years and have built this wonderful solution that we want to talk about tonight as part of our vision for automation of monitoring and sustainable monitoring practices. And I'd love to talk to everyone about it tonight. I'm really looking forward to this one.
All right, thanks, Blairim. Thanks, Dave. So you're going to be hearing a lot more from Blairim and Dave as we go through. Just up front, a few sort of house rules. There aren't really any. I'll give you a quick overview of the order we're going to go through. I'm going to share a few things about NetBox Labs and NetBox. Blairim's going to talk about Icinga, and then Dave's going to show us kind of the meat of the presentation, really, where he looks at Sol1, what they've been seeing and why it is that they came up with this integration. And then we're also going to get the demo towards the end. Just before we go into that, I wanted to start us off. Actually, one more thing I want to mention. If you've got questions, I already put this in the chat. We do have a Q&A section at the end, but we're also very happy to take questions throughout. So just drop them into the chat, and then I will find opportune moments to ask those questions of the panelists. So just to get started today, we're going to look at some sort of trends that we're seeing in networking right now. I think the headline kind of says it all. Network teams are too busy. A few little stats over here on the right. If I can move my speakers out of the way for a minute. 65% of network changes are performed manually. You can see all the references for these down the bottom. And, this is something which is probably falling as people are looking at more and more network automation. And one of the things that we see, like a classic example of network automation that you see everywhere, is things like automating device configurations, right? Like everybody likes that one. But what we know is that there are many areas where you can start automating in networks to reduce this operational overhead and reduce errors. And we're going to be looking at one example of those today. Number two on here, 78% of orgs believe that have implemented a network source of truth believe it is effective. I'm going to be talking about NetBox a little bit later on. In the next slide, we're going to be looking at how this is part of a general pattern of people using a network source of truth integrated into other tools to help them, let's say, reduce operational overhead, be a little bit less busy. And then this last one's really stark. And this is, I kind of want to open all of it up to the panelists, but this last one really sucks, which is 11% of network operators feel they are successful, which is an 8% decrease year on year. I think it was like 24% up from that 3 years ago. This third one comes from our friend Seamus McGillicuddy at Enterprise Management Associates, where he tracks periodically how teams think they're doing. And they don't think they're doing very well. So, that's kind of the background. I'm wondering, Dave, Blairim, does this tally with what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, I mean, the network ops often struggle with massive vendor problems. I've got one of our customers is currently stuck waiting for Cisco to figure out firmware patches. And on top of that, they're operating with, bad information, vendors that don't actually assist with any of the process of building a larger ecosystem, and they all want to grab their own slice of the pie and push the others out. And so it doesn't create a very realistic picture for your average network operator when they're stuck with, we've got Juniper, Cisco, whatever it might be, all fighting for a piece of their own attention and not deciding to actually work together and interoperate. And, Blairim and I have been on the, open source, open standards train for a very long time. And, there's a freedom from vendor lock-in is the reason people choose open source products. That's the real driver. And many of these network vendors are, completely opposed to that and completely still have practices that I think just make people feel, not as successful as they could be, because they are locked into the way they do things. And I think opening up information, opening up interoperability, opening up standards is the only way forwards to make people feel like they've actually got control over their environments, that they can do the jobs every day that they turn up to do and do it well.
Yeah, I can agree with Dave. Maybe something to add to that. What we see a lot is that throughout the past decade or so, we can clearly see that the resources decrease in the companies, of the resources of people who take actually care of these things. Companies take less time to train their staff, and to give them sufficient time to actually work on the to-dos, on the items of their to-do list. Everything has to move very fast, so less people and less time to do it properly. Most likely also leads to this decrease of success in managing network equipment, and also for monitoring. It's very similar, and all the automation processes.
All right, so we've got a background of having to choose between vendor offerings that maybe don't work together very well, reducing budgets in some areas, and presumably bigger and more complex networks. One of the things I like to talk about is swivel-chair operations. This is something we hear all the time, and I think this is one of the things that today's integration really helps to reduce. Like, not only am I doing more with less, but I'm also trying to keep track of this network in a ton of different places. And we'll talk about how network source of truth fits here in a minute. But is this just me, or is this something you guys see too?
Yeah, absolutely. You get alerts from all sorts of different places. You see people getting alert fatigue when it comes to monitoring. You see people receiving information from their bosses, from their ticketing systems, from all sorts of other things, and they're all a bit disparate. And and I think there is other problems there as well. The organizations often don't actually take the time to break down the barriers between teams. You've got a network team that blames the application teams that blames the network, and they don't necessarily have enough interfaces and information to be able to ask good questions, or and they sit there just pointing fingers, and it takes ages. And I think my current record for getting a firewall rule done is 2 years, due to complete dysfunction. So it's if that's a metric, I'm not surprised people are upset.
Yeah. I think it's tightly connected what I was mentioning before. To become an expert in these fields takes plenty of time and plenty of people. And if you try to rush things, from my experience, it may feel good in the beginning because you're getting successful very fast for the small tasks. But in the long term, it will turn out that those quick fixes and quick solutions will not last. So from my opinion, from my point of view, it's always better to calmly work on these topics until you can actually reach the speed you're looking for, because in the beginning it's always going to be slower than expected. So yeah, I would wish that people don't look only for the quick wins.
Got it. Okay. That's interesting, because I think one of the pieces of feedback that people are getting, you see this all over the place, is start small when it comes to network automation. And, I was at AutoCon in Amsterdam in May, I think. And there's a lot of people saying kind of what you're saying, Blaren, which is start small, but have a plan for where you're going, so that small thing doesn't become sort of orphaned. And to your point, Dave, doesn't become siloed. So now you're the only person that can use it, and you've actually added to the problem, I suppose. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. You've probably all seen this before if you're on the call. If you haven't, at NetBox Labs, we use it a lot. This is our modern network automation architecture. And what it tries to do is to capture the tippy top of what we see people doing when they're automating, like fully automating their networks. Obviously, this is an aspirational goal for many, but it's useful for today's call because today's use case is specifically called out on here. Like I said earlier, one of the things that people are very excited about in network automation, especially if you read all the tutorials and the getting started guides, is sort of this bit where operations are telling the network source of truth what should happen, and then some sort of automation is happening to push that out to the network. I think one of the things that's looked at less is this observability and assurance side, where what we're trying to do really is check that the network is performing as, or actually exists as we intend it to. And in here, we've got this arrow where we look at our network source of truth and the intended state in the network source of truth and how that can go and update the observability or the assurance. And that's often an area which is, as we're going to see today, it is automatable, but it's often left out. Now, Dave, I know you're going to speak about this in more detail later, but could you just hint at some of the problems that occur when, people have, like you said, a siloed view from maybe the observability side, which isn't in line with what should be in their network source of truth?
Yeah, the fundamental problem there is that you get a guy or a team that is that's tasked with setting up the monitoring or the observability or whatever it might be. They rush to roll out tools. They do a bunch of discovery. They don't necessarily engage correctly with the other teams and don't necessarily even have all the right information. And so information is lost in spreadsheets, in people's SSH configs, in all sorts of places. Everyone's got the classic story of servers that just seem to do important things and no one has any idea what they do. This creates a nightmare for building a monitoring solution that is actually going to provide service delivery, provide operational quality to your ultimate customers, which is we want to make sure our computers are doing what our businesses that they work for need to do. And to do that, we need to know everything there is that's useful about them, that's current, and have the system reinforce itself and survive past our existence in the organization. So that's what we've built today, and that I think is the goal. And we really kind of, I think, have achieved that. And I really love this diagram, by the way. It's fantastic. It's missing a couple of logos, which we can talk about later. But
Yeah. I was on PTO last week. We will update this before it goes out. One other thing to note, by the way, is if any of this is resonating, drop it in the chat. We'd love to know if you're seeing this as well, or if you disagree. It doesn't have to be a straight question about what you're hearing. It can also be an opinion. But now, before we get into the demo, we're gonna look at NetBox a little bit, and then we're gonna look at Icinga a little bit, and then Dave's gonna bring it all together. For anyone who's not familiar, NetBox Labs, founded in 2023. NetBox itself came out of DigitalOcean in 2016, and the NetBox Labs, as it says here, were the commercial stewards for open source NetBox and increasingly other tooling as well. What we find is that typically, to go back to this diagram here, like networking teams, unless they're a new team, unless they're like in Valhalla, which is like a new team in a greenfield network, which hardly ever happens, they find that they've got all sorts of different processes that are already there. And what's difficult for them is to come up with a way to bring all those together. And, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on what a network source of truth is today or what NetBox does, but just to point out that it's often used in exactly this use case, where you've got a lot of disparate sources of information, often siloed, as Dave mentioned earlier, and bringing them together often brings teams great cost savings, a lot less frustration. Just to look for a minute at how, one second. There we go. I just want to talk you through a quick journey of how people use network source of truths like NetBox. This is an area of great contention in the community. A sort of rumor got out at some point that the only way to use NetBox is as your intended state for the network. That's certainly what a bunch of people do, but it's not the only way. And the journey that we often see people going through with NetBox is something like this: document, model, automate. And I'll talk very quickly about what we mean by those. A lot of people that start using NetBox or NetBox Labs products like NetBox Cloud or NetBox Enterprise come from a situation where they're not really even able to start connecting systems accurately yet because they don't have a clear view of what the network is. So the first step for many people is to start in this document stage where they'll start pulling things out from all over the place. If they're lucky, it's from some other tool that's being kept up to date. But most of the time, we'll find spreadsheets that are hard to maintain or other tools that maybe aren't maintainable anymore that they built in-house. And the first step is often just getting a view of what's actually in the network. And we get to the modeling stage where we're starting to connect data. And we're going to see a kind of a good example of model and automate today. Like once we start asking ourselves questions like, how does what's in NetBox relate to what's in my monitoring? That's when we're in the modeling stage. And then obviously when we go to that extra step and actually connect those through an integration like the one that Dave and Sol have created that we're going to see later on, that's when you're then automating. So part of this is just my hobby horse at the moment to kind of kill that view that's held out there that the only way to do it is to start by automating and using NetBox as your intended state. Really, people start across here and they find great value in doing all of that. NetBox is very popular. I'm not going to say a lot about this. I'm going to skip right through because we've got a lot to get to. NetBox is everywhere. One of the great things that was touched on earlier around open source is that it gets software out there. And because NetBox has been out there and being built on for 8 years now, what it means is that we find out that NetBox is absolutely everywhere. And this has a couple of upsides. One of the things is like it's tested. You're not using some brand new tool. But also what it means is that there's this huge community around it that are always building, providing feedback and working with us to make it better. And today's webinar is a fantastic example of the building side of that. We find out that NetBox is in crazy places like nuclear submarines and battleships and all over the place. And it's really out there and it's a huge fun community. I'm going to stop talking about NetBox now because I'm going to assume that most of you already know about it. I'm going to hand over to Blarim to tell us a little bit more about Icinga.
Awesome, thank you. I think we can skip this first slide, move on to the next. At Icinga, I just put a few wishes together that we basically always see when working together with our clients. Even though each infrastructure is different from the other, we always see the same wishes, and you may find yourself here. And I would just like to demonstrate on what we are working, because basically Icinga is being used by usually very large enterprises to monitor thousands of devices across multiple countries or continents, and to bring the data all together into one single pane of glass. And our users usually are looking for flexibility on the one side, but also reliability on the other. Looking for a monitoring system that can be integrated with their current landscape, but also with newer technologies. A monitoring system that allows them to scale and to grow as their infrastructure grows. It should be unified and also allow the users to track the notifications and alerts and so on. So most likely you're going to find at least one of your wishes from your list here as well. And I would like to explain how Icinga works in order to fulfill those wishes. Can we move on to the next slide? And to explain that, we usually use the 6-in-1 stack. But basically, Icinga consists of multiple components that are put together in order to build a monitoring solution that fits each customer's or user's needs, because there are components that you can use, but you don't have to use them, and so on. From a bird's eye view, next slide, please. We usually start at the infrastructure perspective because there's always something there that has to be monitored when starting with Icinga. So I haven't met anyone yet that started with monitoring before they had their infrastructure actually. And each infrastructure usually is very heterogeneous. There is some physical servers somewhere that hasn't been migrated yet. There is a private cloud based on OpenStack or VMware or something else. There is a public cloud account at AWS because someone started migrating stuff, but they aren't done yet. There are plenty of different applications. So the challenge for a monitoring system like Icinga is to cover very different things that need to be monitored, not only from the server perspective, but also from the application perspective, which basically the things that are running on those servers, because nobody wants a monitoring solution for each of their applications. Let's move on to the next slide. With Icinga, we basically connect to all those things with an agent or agentless in order to collect the data from those devices and applications. It does not really matter if it's a physical hardware or if it's a public cloud account. Icinga basically works on all of those systems. As mentioned before, users can choose to either use the agent, which we prefer, or go agentless. Next up, we visualize that data in dashboards. So all the data that is collected by Icinga is stored into a central database, which we use to create visualizations based on the things collected, to actually see at a first glance what is broken, because that is the focus of the Icinga web interface. Of course, you can see all the okay-ish things as well, but you will notice that when you first log into Icinga, you will see most likely only red and yellow things, because we aim to create an interface where the administrators can focus on the tasks that they need to do. And these are usually the things that are not working right now. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Of course, notifications are a big thing. With Icinga, you can decide who should be alerted about what at which time. So you can create groups and contacts with different integrations. So you can, of course, use plain email, which comes with Icinga, but you can also use different platforms to get those notifications, be it with messages to your phone or with platform providers like PagerDuty, OpsGenie, VictorOps, and all the others. You can connect it with ticketing systems. Icinga can basically notify the whole team through any channel that you want. Let's move on to the last slide of this piece, because automation, and this is something very important for us today here, is a crucial part of Icinga, because we are very aware that our users have very large infrastructures to monitor. Our one pillar of Icinga is automation, and we do it in different ways with a very dynamic and flexible configuration language, but also with possibilities to connect Icinga to other databases, which I will explain further in the next few slides. Let's move on to one of the next slides. Before we move on to the automation part, I would like to, can we move to the next slide? Just say a few words about integrations. Icinga is an open source project and product driven by a company in Germany. And since we believe in open source, we also believe in open APIs. So with Icinga, you will find that you can basically programmatically get any information out of the Icinga monitoring system, but also you can modify and delete any information that Icinga gets, collects, or somehow uses with different APIs that we provide. This is something important, because without this, we wouldn't have been able to create an integration between NetBox and Icinga, for example. There are plenty of different plugins and extensions available out there to make your Icinga tailored to your needs. Let's move on to the next slide, Mark. And also scale it across a large time, because we know that basically everyone is migrating from something to something, but we very rarely see that the size of a IT infrastructure actually shrinks. So scaling is super important as well. How it works with Icinga is that you can just add up multiple nodes to your Icinga setup to scale it to a bigger size, to distribute the load across multiple nodes, but also create high available setups. and use a very secure channel for communication between those nodes. Use automation to distribute the configuration to those satellite nodes and also to the agents, so you don't have to take care about that manually either. And as mentioned before, in our next slide, I'm just saying a few words about automation as well, because that's what brings us here today. What Icinga can do, it can basically connect to third-party databases and collect data and use that data and transform it into monitoring configuration. How that works is that periodically Icinga will connect to your MySQL database or to your Active Directory or to your whatever API, for example, to NetBox, but Dave's going to tell more about that, and collect that information that you want to use. Let's say it's a application name or a host name or a whatever information, and you can use these information and migrate them into Icinga and use this information to create monitoring configuration out of it. And by doing that periodically, you will have that automation process that whenever your central database or multiple databases in your environment get updated, your monitoring system will be updated as well. Which brings me to the next slide. This third-party database can be basically anything. Icinga comes with a bunch of built-in extensions to collect data from different databases like Postgres, LDAP, Active Directory. You can use files, you can connect it to AWS, you can connect it to Active Directory, you can connect it to some random API and collect data and use that data to configure your monitoring system, basically. And in the next slide, I just put one very important feature, which is rolling back the configuration. So Icinga keeps track of any change of the configuration that you make, not only when it's automated, but also if you do manual changes to your configuration. If you do it through the web interface, Icinga will keep track of any of those changes. So this works very similar to what you're used to with Git. So you can see any change made by anyone in the organization, and you can basically also roll back to older versions of your configuration. For example, if something wrong was configured, or whatever. Of course, visualizations is an important thing for us as well. So with Icinga, we'll get different dashboards and different extensions to change those dashboards, to analyze the data that you see, to react to those events. So to leave comments, to work together, to create dashboards, to share dashboards, to create your very own views for different teams, but also to give access to different teams for very certain parts of the infrastructure. So with Icinga, you can basically say that the storage team should only see the storage relevant stuff, and the Linux team should only see the Linux devices, and so on. So Icinga comes with a role-based access control as well. I think we can skip the next slide because we talked about notifications already. And as mentioned before, of course, it does not really matter to Icinga where your infrastructure is running, which is pretty nice, because you can have the very same tool for different cloud providers, for different technologies, for your Kubernetes setup, but also for your traditional monitoring. And it will be all in one interface. And as mentioned, it's highly flexible and dynamic. So that brings me to my last slide. Yeah, basically with Icinga, our goal is to allow our users to automate and customize their monitoring environment in a way that actually fits into their infrastructure. So when starting to use Icinga, we always aim to allow the user to use Icinga in a way that they don't have to change anything in their existing infrastructure. So Icinga should blend in seamlessly and integrate with the existing stuff, and should not require any other change the other way around. Thanks a lot. With that, I think we're ready to hand over to Dave.
Thank you, Blaren. That was awesome. So while we do this, let me just stop sharing for a moment and I'll give you the screen, Dave. While we're bringing that up, just one thing to mention. One of the things you'll hear us talking about a lot in NetBox Labs is open and composable ecosystems on our big tent strategy. And it's great to see Icinga essentially arriving at exactly the same place, right? Solid APIs, partner with people who do other things, and avoid, like Dave said earlier, vendor lock-in or vendors that try to do everything in one go. Dave, you ready?
Yeah, sure. Is that working? People can see my screen.
Looks good.
Fantastic. Yep. Great. So thanks, Blaren and Mark. It's great to hear all your thoughts. I wanted to just really quickly sort of cover off and introduce ourselves because we're probably perhaps less known than the big brands in the room here. So we are a relatively small but long-standing open source focused consulting company, and I believe we punch well above our weight and have many customers of multi-billion-dollar size here in Australia. We've been running for 25 years. We have a team of sort of dedicated engineers. Our focus really has been on moving towards operational technology to provide services. So, TV stations and coal mines and tolling providers and all sorts of other customers are our people. These are people with operational imperatives that need to monitor critical infrastructure, that need to have teams that respond quickly, that have desperately intense SLAs in terms of things. When our customers go wrong, it makes the news, and they don't like that. So we need to make sure that we build things that are highly available, that are scalable, that work reliably. And one of the things about Icinga, for example, is it works on the space station. It works on warplanes and all sorts of other things as well. So there's a lot of reasonably important applications and important companies that do intense things that we work with, and as a result, this stuff has to actually work. One of the things we found as we were building out monitoring solutions for people was that the configuration load eventually meant that the system degraded over time. You had a system that asked your infrastructure questions: how are you doing? What's happening over there? What's going on? And you'd come back to it a few years later, and a customer would be like, "Oh yeah, don't worry about all that. It's kind of red. There's a bunch of broken stuff. We never got around to fixing that. We haven't put the paperwork in, whatever it might be. Oh, we turned that server off and never got around to reconfiguring things. Oh, the guy that knew about this monitoring system, doesn't work here anymore. Now we have 5 monitoring systems, and they all kind of don't work very well, or they kind of cover, other stuff." And people love to throw around the term single pane of glass, which drives me nuts, because I think it's really just a hand-wavy excuse at sort of thinking that that's going to be an easy thing to do. But it's not actually an easy thing to do. And, it requires people to, to some extent, understand what they have first. The first thing we say to people is, what is it that you actually care about? What do you actually have that, you care about, and what makes your business work? And many people are actually, pretty reticent to sort of come to grips with that they actually have to do a whole bunch of hard work, take all those spreadsheets, break down those silos internally, go to the grumpy network guy in the corner and say, "Hey, mate, can you just, read into your SSH config here and just put those hosts in NetBox?" We literally have these conversations with our customers all the time. And it really is to some extent, a cultural shift you have to go through. And as a result of us being able to attempt to add value to the conversation, so that when you say to people, "Look, we really need you to write down what it is that you look after so that we can help you look after it," the value you get out of that is that we have a system now that when you write it down, it will check if it's working. And that's where this whole integration came from. That's where we put the 2 and 2 together. We got Icinga, we got NetBox, we put them together, and we said, this is going to make some sense. Now, interestingly enough, the code base for our integration that we've been working on actually also originally came from DigitalOcean. And we've taken that rewritten it completely, I think, twice now, and now maintain a more sophisticated version. But as Ronald Reagan said, which I think is a Russian proverb, trust but verify. And so we have a network source of truth, but we verify that it is correct as best we can. Alrighty, so how does it actually work? We have, as Blairham outlined, a integration with Icinga Director. It's an extract, transform, load tool for NetBox configuration, and it supports the following features. We can take NetBox devices and all virtual machines, or even FHRP groups, which are sort of virtual IP addresses, and turn them into hosts, and map those hosts using templates with sites, clusters, roles, all those other kind of things. And those templates, the NetBox objects can become variables that are then used to apply configuration to or create templates. This leads to the effect of things like being able to say, right, well, these are all the Windows machines, but those Windows machines, they're in London, and so therefore the latency and all the checks need to be adjusted. And so you set the latency variable at the region, it flows down through the integration to the monitoring configuration. It automatically knows that when I add a host in London, that my latency is going to be higher, or whatever you want it to do. When I add a host in London, I know that the contact group for that is the London team, not the Sydney team. And so these all form templates that flow through the whole thing. So we support contacts, contact groups flowing through to contacts and notification rules, tags and sites, platforms, roles, all those things that you can group together can become host groups. And then for the internal clustering of Icinga itself, and I'll sort of go over this again in the demo, we actually use IP ranges in NetBox to denote what are effectively broad sort of monitoring or network segments. So we often have corporate or operational areas or the DMZ areas or different branches, and each of those areas in the network, sets of IP prefixes, if you will, have a different Icinga satellite that they report to as part of the cluster. So it's, we've got a Tokyo monitoring endpoint, a Berlin monitoring endpoint, a London monitoring endpoint, and we know by using the NetBox IP ranges in a custom field that we can automatically, when we're rolling out the configuration, again using Ansible, that the machine's configuration for each thing that's being monitored knows where its parent is. So that way the cluster kind of forms in an automated fashion. We also use a great tool called Baskets. What Baskets do, and we actually haven't released it yet. It's in our dev branch on GitHub, but we're about to release that. Matt would have done that, but he was sick yesterday. Baskets effectively allow us to bootstrap the whole process. So when you install the software, you download the code, it comes a whole bunch of JSON that bursts into life and gives you a whole bunch of less work to do. So that make things work. And then of course we have hierarchy relationships in templates. So we've made it so that regions and sub-regions and groups all inherit each other, and other sort of nested relationships that we can find are all mapped into the way that templates work, to allow for automatic grouping of things. We also use Ansible. So Sol1's a big Ansible shop. Ansible Dynamic Inventory, something we wrote for a long time, and we maintain some very large Ansible environments for customers, all with this same level of integration. So we do rely on Ansible, not for monitoring, but for effectively rolling out the monitoring, for installing the software, for making sure that the agents are baked in if they need to, making sure the satellites have the right config. And this is all integrated with the NetBox configuration, as we discussed before. So where is it at? We've got some links here. I'll link to those in the chat as well, so they're clickable, actually. About that might be useful. You can get distracted by reading our shiny new webpage. And we've been using this in production for over 4 years. Our largest customer has some 300,000 hosts, soon to be, well, if things go well, 1.5 million hosts. We've got many customers of, as I said, intense but smaller environments across data centers, across countries, and we've really put this thing through its paces. All right, let's see if we can get a demo going. I'll just see if I can share my screen again here. What have we got? Any questions so far?
Visual, you have a question that's just come in. Yeah, visual/diagrammatic representations for Sol1 architecture.
Wait, did I not have that on my slides? What happened to that? Oh, well, no, there was one on that webpage that I linked. Dara, thanks for the question. Effectively, I think you'll see as I show the demo how the sort of material aspect of it works. Let me just kind of show you how the actual bits work, and we'll go from there. There is one on the website that I linked to. Where are we? All right. So let me show you our internal Icinga instance. I wanted to kind of cover off exactly what sort of Director works. If you're not familiar with Director, it effectively creates configuration. It's a tool that is designed to allow you to create templates and effectively have a GUI for configuration. But the most important part, and something we seized on years ago, is to build out this automation section. So you can see here that Director has two phases, an import source phase and a sync rule phase. And so what this really means is that import sources can read from other outside things. So let's say, for example, in this case, we're reading, I don't know, let's say NetBox platforms. And if we have a look at that, we've got, a NetBox URL and we're reading an object of type platform, and we update, some bits about the platform in the fields. When we come through to the sync rule, if I try and find the platforms here, what do you know? Platforms become a host group. So we have the platforms just simply become a group. And that therefore then will go into a template, and everything that has that platform, every device or virtual machine that has that platform can then inherit that template by using another sync rule as part of that, as part of the process here. Let's have a look a bit closer here. Let's say we've got a server device and we have a look at modifiers. This is a bit more complicated. We're taking in some variables and pulling in various bits and pieces about configuration from NetBox and loading them into Director, and then mapping those through to variables that will sit on the Icinga object, which will then adjust the checks that we need. So in this case, we have services to exclude from the services check, or what backup directories do we need to monitor on this particular backup server, or what is the load element that we need for this particular server. We have, this is our, small Sol1 hosting environment, which, is fine for a demo. And of course, we've got servers with different loads. Some are hotter than others. And so you want to be able to say in NetBox that this server is going to have a load average of 15, and this other server is going to have a load average of 5 or 200, and that's normal. And you want to be able to have the team that knows about that be able to have somewhere to adjust it without having to come into the monitoring system and break it, or manage things in any other way. You've got a single source of truth for what it looks like to be normal from that sort of point of view. So we set up rules that pull the information in, but let NetBox actually set the values. And then that sync rule that flows through to a device here. Where is that? So one server device host, and we have a whole bunch of properties, and we can see here in these properties that we're pulling in all the useful bits and pieces that we had before. We've got an IP range, as we talked about. We've got a primary IP address. These are NetBox things that you'd be familiar with being mapped through to Icinga objects, which you may be less familiar with, but are very helpful in terms of being able to import and map out things. And then the rest of the stuff happens, the rest of the magic happens through the magic of Icinga apply rules. And apply rules are very much a sort of domain specific language that says, right, for every machine apply a ping check, but inherit from the host the configuration which says what the values of that ping check should be. So that might be latency values. So let's say, back to my London example, because NetBox has a region, that region has a latency value. That latency value overrides the default and sets the value for that site. So if we go back again and just have a quick look at, actually, sorry, I want to show one other thing just about Director if you weren't familiar with it.
Yeah, we get a couple of things that came in. Chelsea Williams, I missed your comment. You said, could you share the link in the chat? Could you remind us what you want the link to, please? And then Andre asks if we can make the font slightly bigger, Dave.
Sorry, Andre, I can do that. My screen is a little large, I realize that.
There we go.
Is that better?
That is better.
Okay, so I just wanted to point out this activity log here. So the Icinga is always running this Director daemon, and it's polling the NetBox API like every 5 minutes or however long you want to, however fast you want it to work. And you can see here that this is actually making modifications to the system as we go. You know, we removed a machine, and the NetBox and the system automatically deleted that host from the monitoring, because, you know, we decommissioned this service or decommissioned this one or decommissioned this thing, and we can just click deploy changes if we want to deploy those changes, and then the configuration actually gets applied. Those machines will be removed from the configuration, and away we go. I think they're meant to be automatically deployed, but, you know, that's, I don't know why it's not running, but it's a great way of actually demonstrating the actual system working. I'll just jump across to NetBox as well and just illustrate how some of the values in NetBox look. So here we can see an IP range. This particular IP range is just a small subnet, and we can see that we've set a custom field here for the zone. And this is the way that our staff, you know, who are building out virtual environments or whatever it might be, are able to simply say what is the satellite for that particular zone. In this case, it's the customer's virtual firewall. Excuse me. So I just wanted to also cover off roughly how it looks from a other configuration point of view. If we pick a server here, which is a backup server, we've got a few custom fields in NetBox that mean that when we want to turn things on and make it go live, the filtering part of Director can say to, you know, hey, this server is now worth monitoring. And we can figure out which part of the configuration we want to do. We want to say that this particular one is a SOL1 server, and, you know, we don't want to monitor it for customers. And that can say, you know, because this is a hosting environment, we've got some internal infrastructure and some customer infrastructure, and so we've got a mixture of these things. And the
Dave, sorry, could you make the font bigger on this one as well, please?
Sorry, that's a tricky one. How's that?
That's much better. Thank you.
Apologies. All right, so you know, this machine is called Sandwich. I just wanted to point out that Sandwich is a backup server, and it has a bunch of config contexts that we're using to actually plumb into the monitoring system. So we've got some satellite information, and because we've got a, you know, this is a you know, machine in our head office, it does some backups, and we've got a bunch of other backup data that is laid out here. So when we want to make a change to the backup, this is quite an old server. It's sort of, you know, pretty legacy sort of stuff, but it's a good example. We want to make a change to which texts get backed up. Sorry, which backups get checked to see if they're working. This is the list that you come to. So the guy making a change, he, you know, deletes a customer backup or adds one. He can come in here, edit the config context, simply add a line, and then that directory flows all the way through to the monitoring check. And then now a check is, you know, instantiated and mapped and monitored as an example there. On top of that, the machine has to be active and all those other sort of things for all of that to work. So that's the basics of the integration. I can demonstrate larger scale if required. I think I'd love to actually have some questions and answer some questions if that's all right. I think we've got time for that now. I think that's the right time, Mark, if that's all right.
Absolutely. We've been going kind of live, so I don't think we've got any new ones come in. I think there was one. Well, we could maybe go back to Dara's point. You pointed Dara over to the homepage for visual and diagrammatic representations for the SOL1 architecture. Is that something we could take a quick look at? And in the meantime, if there are any more questions, we're in basically the Q&A part now. So throw them in. Andre,
maybe something that I would like to maybe Dave can share that or me or something, because we right now saw that Icinga is capable of leveraging those information that you already have in NetBox, and we clearly see that the data can be transferred from NetBox to Icinga and modified in different ways to make Icinga configuration out of it. And Dave, you mentioned the apply rules as well. Do you have anything where we can see the actual result, how it looks like when those systems are being monitored?
Absolutely, yeah. I can show you very quickly how that works. Where are we? we have a look here. I'll show you Sandwich. We talked about Sandwich. It's a backup server. And it has a whole bunch of different services. So there's 43 services that are all generated automatically, and they get created. And I'll show you the apply rule in a second. So, and that's a rule that is created directly based off the variables that are placed into the NetBox thing. Does that answer your question? But there's actually a rule here, I think, which you want to look at: service apply rules. And so we actually find the rule for backups. Div. It's a single rule that automatically creates properties, based on that. And then this is just a set of variables that gets filled in from the automation. So that single rule generates, just on that one host, 43 different backup checks for as part of all the jobs that it's running. Does that explain that?
Yeah, I guess so, because I just wanted to see it, because the apply rules that you have here, they basically tie together those two ends, because on the one side you have a monitoring system that is capable of executing monitoring checks, and then the other side you have NetBox that has all the relevant data about what is there and what is running. And with the apply rules, you basically tie them together and say, okay, let's use these types of monitoring checks on these types of devices accordingly.
That's right. So here we have one for Zimbra mailbox in host tags, and the tags get plumbed through from the NetBox tags. If you want to make a new check, you just tag it, so on and so forth. We've got all sorts of different, bespoke and interesting bits and pieces in our environment. It's a relatively small hosting environment. In our much larger environments, they actually tend to have less rules because they're a lot more uniform, for their larger things.
We've got one question that's going to come in live. Andre, you should now be able to talk.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for great presentation, for giving the context, and showing which role, which product plays. But I want maybe to go a little bit more technical about network device monitoring. So what are capable of, and maybe you can mention protocols like SNMP, Net Conference on. So because there was a lot of discussions about IT infrastructure like virtual machines, and monitoring. But if we touch only network portion of it, maybe you can showcase or focus on this portion. Is it possible, for example, to generate configs for different vendors' devices? There is a possibility to maybe have a unified data models for monitoring through different network devices, and what technology, protocols or standards that we started discussion today are used to achieve these goals. Thank you in advance for your answer.
Sure, I can take that. Icinga is capable of monitoring anything that you'd like, any protocols that you'd like. And one of the customers, for example, that we're working with recently has a big sort of discovery problem. They've got networks that have sort of gotten out of hand, and they need to discover things. And so the question is do I go out and find things and then put them straight into the monitoring system, or do I actually go out and find things and put them into NetBox? And we're always pushing them towards putting them into NetBox, because then we can keep a stateful representation of what's happening from there. One of the tools, to speak directly to your thing that I'm working with them on, is a tool called Thola, THOLA, and Thola can do SNMP based discovery of devices, and then take effectively, I've got an IP address and an SNMP public query, and then I can take that and update NetBox with the VLANs, the interface descriptions, all those other kind of bits and pieces, just using SNMP query. And then that can flow back through the monitoring system, and then actually use the same Thola plugin to do the monitoring. And so we're building that out for a customer in the resource industry, and it's going really well. But there's lots of different approaches, I guess, to sort of answer your question in other ways. There's lots of different approaches, lots of different ways that you can ask questions of systems and get them integrated and have those answers come back in a way that makes sense.
All right, I hope that was useful, Andre. We've got like 3.5 minutes left, so please feel free to throw any more questions in. We could probably fit another couple in if they're small, but in the meantime, I just want to start getting some last bits in. Blurham, on the Icinga side, what's coming up on the roadmap that we should be aware of? And then I guess, same question for you, Dave, for the integration afterwards, if that's all right.
So from the Icinga perspective, there are two major things that we are currently working on. One is improving the way how users can notify their team about alerts. So notifications are being rebuilt in a way that it will work very similar to platforms like PagerDuty and Opsgenie and so on, but on-premise in your Icinga installation. And the other thing, what we're currently working on is monitoring Kubernetes clusters. So we want to combine the traditional network and server infrastructure with more modern technologies like containers, and that's something users can already try out.
Great, thanks, Blurham. Dave, you mentioned you've sort of hinted at some customers that are getting very large and some changes that you're making to the integration. Is there a roadmap for that? Are there any things that we should be looking forward to?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually really looking forward to the NetBox versioning and what that will do, because that will change the game significantly for making changes and integrating things, and then having a feedback loop and being able to suggest that something's incorrect or whatever it might be. That would be really, really, really interesting. So we're looking forward to that. We've done a lot of tuning and work in terms of scaling. When you get to hundreds of thousands of devices, 1 million IP addresses, NetBox can chug, and so we've done a lot of scaling out of that. Customers have got many front ends and a giant AWS bill or whatever it might be to make that work. And so having to work very carefully and closely with how the API works, and the recent changes there has kept our performance increases and all those other kind of things up to date. So really a lot of performance improvements, and then the ability to have baskets and get things a lot smoother and up and running. And then on top of that, I think we're starting to do a fair bit more discovery, and then having that discovery information flow back through and enrich things is, I think, going to be a way forward.
Perfect. Well, so the versioning functionality that Dave's referring to is called NetBox branching and change management. The NetBox branching side of that, which you can think about as being a bit like Git, is going to go into beta. I think it's next week. So keep an eye out for that. That's open source. Everybody can use it. We have run out of time. So all that's left for me to do is to thank you all very much. Blurham, thank you. Dave, thank you. This has been great. And, as we do with all of these partnerships, we're going to keep building on this. I won't be surprised if we come back a few quarters from now and do a little update on where we're at.
Great.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Feel free to get in touch if you need anything.
Thank you. Bye-bye.